السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وأصحابه وسلم. It's always a privilege, in fact, to travel and to get the opportunity to address wonderful people like yourselves. In fact, it reminds me of a narration concerning one of the Prophet's close companions, Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu ta'ala anhu, who became the Khalifa, the Amir al-Mu'mineen, the leader of the Muslims, and he was once, in fact, addressing a crowd, a very big crowd, and he said to them, you see, لَقَدْ كُنْتُ قَبْلَ سَنَوَاتٍ أَرْعَى النَّاسِ الْغَنَمَ وَلَقَدْ فِي مَكَّةٍ. Just some years ago, I was a shepherd herding some sheep in Mecca, and I would earn a few copper coins. Abdurrahman ibn Auf, who was there, said, "Oh Umar, why on earth did you need to say that? Like, why did you feel the need to include that bit of information?" And he said to him, "A'jaba nafsi, my nafs, my lower self, if you like, became pleased with itself," meaning I had an inkling of some pride, of some, pride at my own achievements. I could see myself addressing great crowds and everything. And he said, I wanted to bring myself back down to earth, bring myself back down to reality, meaning who on earth am I really? Where did he gain this inspiration from, this level of humility, bearing, of course, he was a man who before Islam buried his own daughter alive. That was a pre-Islamic tradition. Men would bury their daughters alive, right? And the Prophet put an end to that practice. But he was, of course, someone who did that. He buried his own daughter alive. And now, of course, he's concerned about being ostentatious or being proud and letting people see that. You see, once a man came to the Prophet, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he began to shake in the Prophet's presence, because he felt this degree of awe and this degree of amazement and wonderment, how great of a person you are. And he began to shake in the presence of the Prophet. And the Prophet replied, he says, "Hawwin alayk, فإني لست بملك, إني أنا امرأة من قريش كانت تأكل القديد." Relax yourself, I am the king. Relax yourself, I am the king. I'm only the son of a woman who used to eat dried, salty meat in the desert. And that is a Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was a Prophet of Allah, a messenger from Allah, upon whom would descend revelation and instruction from Allah, subhanahu wa ta'ala, who had companions, right, who would obey him. But he taught people what humbleness and humility. And in fact, there is a tradition that is called Hadith al-Ula, the first hadith. This is a hadith that many of the scholars will teach their students, meaning the first thing that they will teach their students, before anything else. This hadith, Ar-Rahimun yarhamuhum ar-Rahman, yarhamu man fil ard, yarhamukum man fis sama. The merciful ones are those whom the All-Merciful shows mercy towards. So be merciful with those on earth, and the one in heaven will be merciful unto you. Where are we, or what are we without the essence? What are we and where are we without the inner qualities that dictate our outer behavior and our actions? We are not supposed to be a people of the outer, or a people of show, or a people of the gloss that you would find in celebrity culture today about the image, in the words of Daniel Burstyn or Chris Hedges in his very acclaimed work, The Empire of Illusion, or Daniel Burstyn's earlier work on The Image, a guide to pseudo events in America. What is a concern is the aesthetic, or it's a gloss. It's the visual appeal. It's the image before the ideal. It's the image before the ideal. Right? So when we become subservient to the idea or the image itself, rather than the ideal, then we know, of course, we are not doing what we're supposed to do as human beings, as Muslims. And so the Prophet came to teach people about the ideal, what about the image, what about what you see. That can be pretentious, could be anything. Right? We could all be fake individuals and putting on a face. But the Prophet taught about the inner. This is why in the famous hadith, called the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, when Jibreel alayhi salam, Gabriel came to the Prophet sallam, and he asked him some questions. Akhbirni ala Islam, tell me what is Islam. He says this and that, 5 pillars, this is sadaq, he's spoken the truth. Then the second question, tell me about Iman. And he told him about what is faith, what is Iman. He said, sadaq, you've spoken the truth. But the third is perhaps the most pertinent question. He says, Akhbirni ala al-ihsan, tell me about ihsan. He says, أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه وإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك. Ihsan is to worship Allah as though you're seeing Allah. But if you cannot, and you cannot of course be in that spiritually profound state, then you should know at least Allah is seeing and observing you. That is the inner condition, that is the inner quality that our Prophet was concerned with. And of course that was the command of Allah in the Quran and the instruction in Surah Al-Mulk, الَّذِي خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Allah has created death and life to test those who are best in action, not necessarily those who are most indeed, but those who are best indeed. And so he said to this man, Hawwin alayk, relax yourself, be easy, because I am no king. I am only the son of a woman who used to eat dried, salty meat in the market. Allah in the Quran says, وَلَا تَمْشِي فِي الْأَرْضِ مَرْحًا, don't walk on the earth with insolence. Right? That's in the Quran. Don't walk on the earth with a sense of vanity or a sense of pride and insolence. The poet said, وَلَا تَمْشِي فَوْقَ الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا تَوَاضَعًا فَكَمْ تَحْتَهَا مِنْ قَوْمٍ مِنْكَ أَرْفَعُوا فَإِنْ كُنْتَ فِي خَيْرٍ وَعِزٍّ فَكَمْ مَاتَ مِنْ قَوْمٍ مِنْكَ أَمْنَعُوا. Don't walk on the earth except with humility, because how many people underneath the earth are higher than you? Meaning they've passed away, but they're more pleasing to their Lord than you are. And if you think you're in some safety and some peace and goodness, how many people underneath the earth are in a safer condition than you are? And that was the instruction of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A man once came to him sallallahu alaihi wasallam in the early days of Mecca, when propaganda is high and people are labeling him and accusing him of this and that, and they're scared of his message because people are embracing Islam and leaving their old ways. And a man came and said, Oh Muhammad, are you the one, in fact, who is leading everyone astray? Are you that man? You're leading everyone astray. He said, ذَلَكَ هُوَ اللَّهُ. No, that is Allah who is doing that. That is Allah who is doing that. I am unable to lead or guide anyone or mislead anyone. That is the condition of the heart. If people choose a path of misguidance, and they've chosen their way. But if they choose a path of guidance, then Allah will take them on the way. He said, that is Allah who is doing that. They said, really? What are you telling the people then? Why is it that this storm has been created around you? What are you telling the people? He said, just listen to me for a second. He said, oh, listen. I'm telling the people, you're a poor man, right? He said, yes. I'm telling the people to give to poor people like yourself. I'm telling the people not to bury their children alive. I'm telling the people not to usurp the rights and the privileges of orphan children. I'm telling the people not to worship idols and statues, but to worship Allah, who alone is one and He has no partners. I'm telling the people to be good to their parents, to be decent human beings. At the end of it all, he says, is that if that's really the case, Ashhadu annaka Rasulullah, I testify that you are the messenger of Allah. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And like this, in the early days of Mecca, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would have this real profound nature about himself. A man came and he says, عرفت أن وجهه ليس بوجه كذاب. I realized his face was not the face of the lion. And then he approached the Prophet and says, Ashhadu annaka Rasul, I testify that you are the messenger of Allah. Right? Because of course before Islam he was known as Al-Amin, he was known as a truthful one. Of course, if for someone to pretentiously claim anything, prophethood or other than that, people would check the track record. What was he before he began to make these claims about himself? What was he before? What was his track record before? What did people know of him before? But even the enemies would admit, of course, the Prophet ﷺ was known as the most trustworthy man amongst them. the most truthful man amongst them. He was known to be the most generous man amongst them. This is why when he came from the cave in that initial experience when the angel commanded him with the words of Allah, Iqra, read. And he says, Ma ana biqari, I am unable to read. And again he was commanded, Iqra, read. And again he says, Ma ana biqari, I am illiterate, I am unlettered, I am unlearned, I cannot read. And the third time when he was squeezed, and the angel commanded again with more power, اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. Read in the name of your Lord, right? Not for some worldly purpose or to achieve some mundane end. No, it has a higher purpose, a higher ideal. Read. But when you read in the name of Allah. When you read, when you learn, when you study, you're doing it for a higher purpose, not for some mundane. Like, in fact, one of the chapters in Chris Hector's book is the illusion of wisdom. Right? The illusion, and he in fact lists anecdotes and examples from university professors and lecturers. I'm not saying they're all bad, but in his view, there is a degree of pretension in that, or in some experience that he lists in his book. The illusion of wisdom, meaning it becomes some kind of ownership or property that people own. And because of that, they become arrogant or proud because of what they know. Even though, of course, we know as Muslims, Allah says in the Quran that there is no one who knows, except above him is one who knows more. Right? Above everyone who knows, there is someone who knows more. And that is Alim, that is Allah, who knows everything. Allah is the giver of knowledge and the container of knowledge and the one who withholds and gives everything. The prayer of the angels in the Quran when they saw Adam and he knew the names of everything. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت الحليم الحكيم. Subhanak, right? Glory be to you. We have no knowledge except that which you've taught us. But you, in fact, are the all-knowing of everything and the most wise. And so that was the Prophet's disposition. Early on in the early days of Mecca, another very interesting anecdote is when this woman approaches him. And she, of course, is victim to this big propaganda against him and this character assassination. And she comes, and he sees her from the distance. And here is a woman who is struggling and trying to upload some bags, right? Carry her loads, her bags. She's struggling to do that. The Prophet, of course, is someone who is maligned in his society in those early stages, and he's attacked, and his life is at risk, but he sees this woman struggling with her shopping. A very basic and a human experience that we might see every day. In fact, when we walk the town or the high street, we see people carrying heavy loads, but how many of us would bother to even ask those who are struggling with the heavy loads, would you like some help? Right? And this is why it's so interesting these days, because where is the ethic? You might have a PhD, that's great, but you might be awful parents. You might have a PhD, wonderful, but you might be an awful husband or a wife. What in fact have you learned from your education experience? You might have a PhD, but you won't even have the desire to help people in need or in the street to carry loads. The person saw this woman in this condition, and he approached her. And she didn't know it was him, right? So she felt at some ease, I guess, this guy is going to offer his assistance and help. And he came and he took the loads from her and he said, I will carry these to your home. On that journey, the woman begins to talk to this man, the Prophet, and says, you know what? Things are very bad these days in our society because there is a man called Muhammad, and she didn't know, of course, it was Muhammad himself who was carrying her bag. He claims to be a prophet. And he claims to be this, and he claims to be that, and he's disrupting our society, and he's separating children from their fathers, and vice versa, and this and that. Until at the end of the journey, she said, you know what, I know you want something back. You want me to reciprocate your kindness. I don't have money to do that. I can't pay you for your kindness and generosity, but I can simply give you advice, and advice, of course, is like a treasure for you. My advice is, stay away from this man. That's what I'm going to say. Just stay away from this man. I can't give you anything else to do anything else.